What was your family's cruelest rule? The cruelest rule in my family was not something my father said in anger once and forgot about. It was not one bad night. It was not a punishment that got out of hand. It was a system. Every single night, my father made us vote on which person in the family deserved to sleep in a real bed and which person deserved to sleep outside in the metal shed. If you refused to rank your own mother and your own siblings from best to worst, you automatically got the worst spot. That was the rule. Dad sat at the head of the dinner table with his clipboard in front of him, like he was running a meeting or hosting some sick game show. He would tap his pen against the paper, look around at all of us, and say, "Time for rankings." He always smiled when he said it. The rest of us would stare down at our plates, because looking at each other meant remembering what we were about to do. We were about to decide who slept warm, who slept cold, who got to feel safe, and who had to spend the night afraid. Dad never included himself in the rankings. He said he was exempt because he managed the system. He said the system needed someone neutral to enforce it. That meant he slept in the master bedroom every night, in a real bed, behind a locked door, with clean sheets and warm blankets, while the rest of us destroyed each other for whatever sleeping spots were left. The highest ranked person got the best bed. That meant an actual mattress, soft pillows, heavy blankets, and a room with a door that locked. Second place got the couch in the living room. Third place got a sleeping bag on the basement floor. Fourth place got the garage with only a thin yoga mat between your body and the concrete. And dead last got the shed. By the time I was 12, I had spent dozens of nights in that shed. All of us had, except for Dad. The shed was metal, rusted in places, and always colder than the air outside somehow. The floor had old gasoline stains that made the blankets smell sharp and poisonous. When it rained, water leaked through the roof. When the wind blew, the walls shook like something was trying to claw its way in. One night, when I was 13, all my siblings ranked me last because I had lost my shoe that morning and made everyone late for school. That was all it took. I had slowed everyone down. So I deserved the shed. I still remember lying on that metal floor while rain hammered the roof like gunshots. The blanket Dad gave me smelled like gasoline, and it was so thin it barely counted as a blanket at all. The cold came up through the floor and burned through my clothes until my bones felt bruised. Spiders dropped from the ceiling onto my face. Mice ran over my legs. I stayed awake shivering so hard my jaw hurt, waiting for morning like it was rescue. The rankings ruined us exactly the way Dad wanted them to. My brother Yusef learned fast that the easiest way to win was not to be good, it was to make everyone else look worse. He hid homework. He broke things and blamed other people. He started fights right before dinner so someone would look angry or unstable when Dad asked for rankings. He would smile during the day, then ruin someone's chances at night with one perfectly placed accusation. Once, he put sugar in Mom's gas tank so she would miss work and look irresponsible. Mom spent 3 nights in the shed while her car got fixed. Yusef slept soundly on the couch. That was what the system did to us. It taught us that kindness was dangerous. Playing fair did not work because someone always needed a scapegoat to avoid last place. Good grades did not matter. Finished chores did not matter. Apologizing did not matter. Loving each other did not matter when the alternative was freezing on a metal floor. Every dinner became a calculation. Who could I sacrifice tonight? Who had annoyed me the least? Who had already been punished too much? Whose suffering could I live with causing, if it meant I did not have to be the one outside? My sister Yasmin figured out that crying could save her. She could make herself sob during dinner about her previous nights in the shed, and sometimes that earned her sympathy votes. She was the youngest, and for a while, that helped her. Her tears made people feel guilty. Yusef made deals. He traded future high rankings for votes that night. He promised the couch. He promised not to sabotage people. He promised whatever he needed to promise, and then he broke those promises the second they stopped helping him. Mom tried to stay neutral at first. She said she would not participate in turning us against each other. But in our house, being neutral just meant having no allies. Everyone ranked her low because no one owed her anything. She spent more nights in the shed than any of us. Eventually, she stopped trying to resist. She would sit at dinner with this empty, defeated smile and rank herself last before anyone else could do it for her. After years of this, we barely talked unless we were negotiating votes. Family dinner was not family dinner. It was Dad, reading names from a clipboard while we glared across the table, planning betrayals and counting grudges. I kept a notebook where I tracked voting patterns. I wrote down who voted for whom, who was forming alliances, who broke deals, who could be pressured, who could be used. I was a kid, and I had a strategy notebook for surviving my own family. Trust died first. Love followed soon after. Then Yasmin got sick during a week of storms. She was running a fever so high she could not sit up at dinner. She lay on the couch shaking and mumbling, too weak to focus on anything, too weak to point at names on Dad's list. But Dad's rule was absolute. If you did not vote, you automatically got the worst placement. Rules are rules, he said. Then he marked Yasmin down for the shed. She was so delirious, she barely understood what was happening when he carried her outside. Rain was pouring through the rust holes in the shed roof. The wind was loud enough to rattle the walls. She was already shivering before he shut the door. By morning, she had pneumonia. She was coughing up blood on the metal floor. The next night, she was still too sick to vote, which meant another automatic shed placement. I tried to sneak her extra blankets. I waited until Dad was upstairs, took 2 from the hallway closet, and tried to push them through the shed door. Dad caught me. He called it tampering with the rankings. He said I was interfering with system integrity. I got 5 nights in the shed as punishment, so I spent those nights 10 feet away from my baby sister, listening to her cough like she was drowning, while Dad sat inside making notes on his clipboard about fairness and enforcement. Mom finally defied him and took Yasmin to the hospital. But by then, something in Yusuf had permanently broken. He would do anything to avoid the shed. Anything. He started recording conversations to use as blackmail. He put laxatives in food before ranking nights. He spread lies about Mom that made Dad scream at her for hours, because he knew if Dad attacked her badly enough, the rest of us might give her sympathy votes, and he could move himself higher. At the hospital, the doctors asked about Yasmin's frostbitten toes. They asked about the rust-colored marks on her skin, the ones from lying on the shed floor. Mom lied. She said Yasmin had been camping. The doctors did not believe her. I could see it on their faces, but they could not prove anything without Yasmin talking, and Yasmin had not said a word since she got sick. Dad punished Mom for taking her in. 2 weeks straight in the shed. When she came back inside after that, she was thinner, quieter, less like a person and more like someone walking through the house after most of her had already left. Then one night, Dad announced what he called a new development in the system. The shed was no longer the bottom. He had dug a pit behind it. It had dirt walls, a dirt floor, and a blue tarp stretched across the top. He stood at dinner explaining it like he was proud of himself, like he had solved a household problem. The shed will be for second to last now, he said. The pit is for whoever ranks last. He looked excited. Yusuf immediately volunteered to dig it deeper in exchange for immunity from last place for a week. That was when I knew we were completely lost. My brother was literally helping dig a grave for his own family members to sleep in, just so he would not have to sleep in it himself. Mom had given up by then. She automatically ranked herself last every night with that small, defeated smile. Yasmin was still weak from being sick, still coughing, still too exhausted to vote properly half the time, which made her vulnerable to automatic punishment. The pit was almost finished, and that night, someone was going to sleep in dirt. I remember standing in the backyard, staring at it. The dirt walls were packed tight. The blue tarp was stretched across the top, sagging in the middle. Dad had arranged it like some twisted camping setup, like if he made it neat enough, it stopped being cruel. My stomach twisted when Dad walked out the back door with his clipboard. That smile spread across his face as he saw all of us looking at the pit. He tapped the clipboard against his palm and announced that tonight was a special occasion, because someone would get to be the first to experience the new placement. Yasmin was inside at the kitchen table, slumped in her chair, barely able to hold her head up. I knew if she could not vote again, she might end up down there in the cold dirt. Right then, I made myself a promise. I would take her place if I had to, no matter what it cost. Even if Dad added punishment nights, even if he made up new rules, even if he hurt me worse for interfering. I could not let Yasmin be the first person in that hole. The sun was setting, and the temperature was already dropping. Frost was starting to form on the grass around the pit's edges. Dad called us inside for dinner, and we filed in silently, each of us taking our usual place around the table. Dad sat at the head with his clipboard ready. He was smiling that awful smile again, the one that meant he was enjoying every second. None of us looked at each other. Mom spoke first. Her voice was flat and empty, like all the life had been sucked out of it. She ranked herself last, just like she always did now, with that small, broken smile. Yusuf leaned toward me and whispered that he would rank me second to last if I supported him for the couch. His eyes were cold and calculating, like he was making a business deal instead of deciding where a member of his family would sleep. I wanted to punch him, but I needed allies if I was going to keep Yasmin safe. So I gave him the smallest nod and watched Dad make notes on the clipboard. Yusuf started his usual performance next. He reminded everyone in a cheerful voice that he had helped with the dishes and taken out the trash. He left out the part where he had broken the bathroom faucet that morning and told Dad I did it. Yasmin tried to do her crying routine, but she was too weak. Tears slid down her pale cheeks, but the dramatic sobbing that usually helped her was gone. She was shaking from fever or cold or both. I could see how hard she was trying to participate and how badly she was failing. The ritual made me physically sick, but I forced myself to go through it anyway. I ranked people in my head. I calculated who could be sacrificed. I hated myself for doing it, but refusing to vote meant automatic pit placement, and I could not help Yasmin if I was the one already buried in the ground. Dad read through each name slowly, savoring every moment as we called out our rankings one by one. When he finished counting the votes, he looked almost disappointed. Then he announced the results. Mom got the pit. Yasmin got the shed. I could tell from Dad's tone that he had wanted Yasmin to end up in the pit for its first night. He wanted the debut to be dramatic. He wanted the weakest one of us in the worst place. But the numbers had not worked out that way. For one tiny second, I felt relief. Then I looked at Mom. Her face had gone completely blank. all expression drained out of her, like someone had pulled a plug. She did not protest. She did not argue. She did not even look upset. She just stood slowly and walked toward the back door like a ghost. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say this was not normal. Families did not do this. We could all refuse together. We could let Dad sleep in his own stupid pit, but the words got stuck in my throat. Yusuf was already heading for the living room to claim the couch. Yasmin shuffled toward the back door, coughing wetly into her hand. That night, I lay in my sleeping bag on the basement floor and could not stop thinking about the week Yasmin got pneumonia. I could still hear her coughing blood onto the metal shed floor. That awful wet sound had gone on for hours while I shivered through my own punishment nights for trying to give her blankets. Dad had called it tampering. He had added 5 extra nights to my sentence. He had stood there with his clipboard taking notes about maintaining system integrity while his daughter was literally dying 10 feet away. The memory made my hands shake with rage. I pressed them flat against the concrete floor until the trembling stopped. Mom was in the pit right then, lying in cold dirt with only a tarp between her and the night sky. I was in the basement, which meant I was safe and warm compared to her. The guilt sat heavy in my chest, but I reminded myself that being inside meant I could still think. I could still plan. I could still find a way to stop this. I could not sleep knowing Mom was out there. Near midnight, I crawled to the tiny basement window and looked into the backyard. The grass glittered with frost. The tarp over the pit sagged in the middle. I could see a shape moving underneath it sometimes, slow and painful, like Mom was trying to find one position that hurt less than the others. Dad's bedroom light was still on upstairs. His shadow moved behind the curtains. He was probably reviewing his clipboard, probably making notes about the rankings, probably planning new improvements to the system. Maybe he was already proud of how well the pit worked. Maybe he was thinking about drainage, or insulation, or how to make it worse while pretending he was making it fair. I pulled out the phone I had been hiding in my sleeping bag, wrapped in an old sock, so Dad would not find it if he searched the basement. I opened the photos I had taken weeks earlier. Yasmin's frostbitten toes. The skin dark and damaged at the tips. The rust marks on her back from the shed floor. Bruises on my arms from the times Dad grabbed me during ranking arguments. My hands shook as I scrolled through them. I realized photos were not enough. Dad could smile through anything. He could charm teachers, doctors, neighbors, and police. He could make people believe we were dramatic kids exaggerating normal discipline. He could say we liked camping. He could say we were acting out. I needed something bigger. Something undeniable. Something that could stop him before someone died in that pit. The next morning, I waited until I heard the shower running upstairs. Then crept into the kitchen. Mom was standing at the sink. I whispered that maybe we could call someone. A teacher, a neighbor, the police, anyone. Mom grabbed my arm so hard her fingers left marks. Her whisper was urgent and terrified. She told me, Dad always found out. She said he had ways of knowing. He checked phones, he read notebooks, he listened through doors. Anyone who tried to get outside help ended up punished worse. Her eyes looked hollow. Not just scared. Broken. That was when I understood that Dad had destroyed her so completely, she could no longer imagine escape. She truly believed we were trapped in his system forever. There was no outside world that could help us. There was only surviving one night at a time. At breakfast, Yusuf was practically bouncing in his chair. He bragged to Dad about how he had made the pit 6 inches deeper the day before. He held up his hands to show the blisters on his palms, like they were trophies. He talked about how the extra depth would give better insulation, like he was improving a product. Dad smiled at him, not the cold smile he used during rankings. A real proud father smile. He promised Yusuf immunity from last place for the next week as a reward for his hard work. I felt sick watching it. My brother had helped improve a punishment hole in our backyard. He had done it eagerly, just so he would not end up inside it. Yusuf met my eyes across the table. There was no guilt in his face. No shame. Only satisfaction. He had secured his safety for another week. He had become exactly what Dad wanted him to be. I spent the rest of that morning trying to understand why Dad did it. What did he actually get from watching us destroy each other every night? It was control, obviously. But it was not only control. He enjoyed the rankings. I could see it in the way his eyes lit up when he read the results. He liked watching us calculate who we loved least in that moment. He liked the fear in our faces when we realized we might be going outside. He liked the desperate negotiations, the whispered deals, the way trust had died and been replaced by survival math. He called it fairness. He called it rules. He called it system integrity. But it was just cruelty wearing a reasonable voice. And he was the only person who never suffered under it. He never spent one night cold or scared. He never lay on concrete, or metal, or dirt. He never had to listen to spiders move in the dark. He slept in his warm bed every night while we tore each other apart for scraps of comfort. At school the next day, I could barely keep my eyes open, in first period. My head kept nodding forward until I jerked awake. The teacher's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. The words on the board blurred into shapes. I dug my fingernails into my palm hard enough to leave marks, because if I fell asleep, I would not be able to think clearly that night. And if I could not think clearly during rankings, Someone might end up in the pit because of me. During math class, I stopped trying to follow the lesson. Instead, I calculated how to protect Yasmin. If I could convince Yusef to rank Mom second to last, and if I volunteered myself low enough, maybe Yasmin could get the couch. It was not much. The couch was still just the couch. But it was inside. It was warm. It was not the shed. It was not the pit. Keeping Yasmin safe had become the only thing in our destroyed family that still felt worth doing. When the lunch bell rang, I did not go to the cafeteria. I went to the second-floor bathroom that almost nobody used. I locked myself in the far stall and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Then I rolled up my sleeves and photographed the bruises on my arms from 3 nights earlier, when Dad had grabbed me during an argument about the rankings. The marks had faded to yellow and green, but they were still visible. Proof. Not normal discipline. Not family structure. Proof. I took 5 photos from different angles under the harsh bathroom light. Then I opened the voice recorder app and started talking in a low whisper. I explained the system. The shed. The pit. The nightly votes. How Dad exempted himself while forcing us to rank each other. I tried to keep my voice calm and factual, but halfway through, my mouth went dry, and I had to stop and swallow. I was terrified someone would walk in. I was terrified Dad would somehow know what I was doing, even from miles away. The recording was only about 90 seconds long. It felt like hours. When I finished, my heart was pounding so hard I felt sick. I deleted it from the recent files list, hid the phone again, and sat on the closed toilet lid until I could breathe normally enough to go back to class. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of exhaustion and planning. I kept thinking about Mrs. McCann. She had always been kind when I fell asleep in class. She never snapped at me the way some teachers did. Sometimes she looked at me like she knew something was wrong, but did not know how to ask without scaring me. I practiced what I might say to her. I tried to figure out how to explain the shed and the pit without sounding crazy. It had to be factual, clear, believable. I could not sound dramatic or emotional, because Dad had spent years teaching us that emotion made people dismiss you. By the time the final bell rang, I had rehearsed the words 20 times. They almost sounded normal in my head. After school, I went to the public library instead of going home. I found a computer in the back corner where no one could see the screen. I created a new email account with a random username that had nothing to do with my real name. Then I uploaded the photos and audio files to a hidden cloud folder. The library Wi-Fi was slow. Every minute felt dangerous. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting Dad to appear behind me even though I knew he could not. Once everything was uploaded, I deleted the files from my phone's camera roll. Then I checked the deleted folder, then the recent folder, then every other folder I could find. Twice. The cloud folder was password protected, and the password was something Dad would never guess. A line from a book Yasmin used to love before she got too sick to care about stories. I got home right before dinner. Dad was already at the table with his clipboard. That sick smile was on his face, like he was about to host another episode of his private game show. Mom set plates down with mechanical movements, her face blank. Yasmin sat hunched in her chair, coughing into her elbow. Yusef watched everyone with calculating eyes. I slid into my seat and leaned toward Yusef. I kept my voice barely above a whisper. I told him I would rank him high if he helped keep Yasmin off the bottom. I promised he could have the couch if he ranked Mom second to last. His eyes narrowed. He weighed the deal like it was a business transaction. Dad's gaze shifted toward us, and I knew he had noticed the whispering. But Yusef gave me the smallest nod. When voting started, I ranked Yusef second and myself last. Yusef followed through. The final results gave Yasmin the couch. Yusef got the basement sleeping bag. Mom got the shed. I got the garage. For about 30 seconds, it felt like a victory. Then I saw Dad writing on his clipboard with that cold, thoughtful look he got whenever he was preparing something new. After dinner, Dad stood. In his calm, reasonable voice, he announced a new rule. Any collusion or vote trading would result in automatic pit placement for both people involved, effective immediately. His eyes were locked on me and Yusef while he spoke. My stomach dropped. He had seen everything. The whispered deal, the coordinated votes, all of it. He was always one step ahead, always finding new ways to isolate us from each other, always making sure no alliance could survive long enough to threaten him. My tiny victory turned to ash in my mouth. Protecting Yasmin had just become much harder. Yusef would not risk helping me again. Not now that Dad had made it punishable. I would be on my own. That night, I lay on the yoga mat in the garage, staring up at the dark ceiling. The concrete floor was cold through the thin mat. My back started hurting almost immediately. The garage smelled like gasoline, dust, and motor oil. I thought about Yasmin getting weaker every day. Mom giving up completely. Yusef becoming a monster just to survive. If I did not speak up soon, someone was going to die in that pit. Maybe Yasmin from another round of pneumonia. Maybe Mom from the cold and exhaustion. Maybe me. If Dad decided he needed to make an example, I had to risk outside help. Whatever Dad did afterward, the guilt of staying silent would be worse. The next morning at school, Mrs. McCann pulled me aside after I turned in an essay I barely remembered writing. The page was a mess. Sentences trailed off in the middle. Paragraphs did not connect. My handwriting looked like it belonged to someone half asleep. She held the paper carefully and asked if everything was okay at home. Her voice was gentle, concerned. I wanted to tell her everything right there in the hallway. I wanted to describe the pit, the shed, the rankings, the clipboard, the way Dad smiled, but the words stuck in my throat. I only said things were complicated and stressful. It was enough to make her worry, but not enough to explain. She studied my face for a long moment. The concern in her eyes was real, not polite teacher concern, actual worry. She did not push, but she asked if I would be willing to talk more after class the next day. I agreed immediately. I needed an ally, even though I was terrified of what Dad would do if he found out. Mrs. McCann wrote her email address on a piece of paper and told me I could contact her anytime, even on weekends. Something about that quiet kindness made my eyes burn. I refused to cry. That afternoon, I was in the kitchen doing homework when the phone rang. Dad answered in the living room. I heard his voice change. It became pleasant, warm, concerned, the voice he used with outsiders. He thanked someone for caring. He promised he would make sure I got more rest. When he hung up, he walked into the kitchen and stared at me. His expression was cold and full of rage. He was barely holding back. I did not have to ask who had called. It was Mrs. McCann. She must have called about my academic performance, my exhaustion, my general well-being. Dad did not say anything at first. He just looked at me with those calculating eyes while I pretended to focus on my homework. But I knew what that look meant. That night's ranking was going to be bad. At dinner, Dad sat at the head of the table with his clipboard, but he did not bother with the normal ceremony. He simply announced that I was being moved to the garage as a pre-penalty for involving teachers in family business. That meant I no longer got to participate in rankings. His voice was calm and reasonable, like he was explaining a natural consequence instead of punishing me for trying to get help. He talked about boundaries. He said teachers needed to stay out of family matters. He said my poor judgment had forced him to take protective measures. Yusuf smirked from across the table. He was clearly happy someone else was being punished. Mom would not meet my eyes. She stared at her plate while Dad explained the new arrangement. That was what happened when you reached out. You got punished. Everyone else stayed quiet because they were terrified of becoming next. The garage floor was cold concrete with only a thin yoga mat. I knew I might be there for days or weeks, depending on how long Dad wanted to drag it out. After dinner, I gathered my sleeping bag and pillow. I walked past my family without saying anything. There was nothing to say anymore. Yusuf headed for the couch, looking satisfied. Mom shuffled toward the shed with her usual defeated expression. Yasmin coughed her way toward the basement. Dad watched me walk to the garage with a small smile. He looked like he had won something important by cutting me off from any chance of outside help. That night, I lay awake on the yoga mat while cold seeped through the thin material into my back. Around 2 in the morning, I heard coughing from the backyard. Wet. Painful. Probably Yasmin in the shed, struggling to breathe. Then I heard a metallic banging sound, like someone shifting around and hitting the wall while trying to find a position that did not hurt. I pressed my ear against the garage wall, but I could not tell if it was Mom in the pit or the shed settling in the cold. Next door, our neighbor Fergus stood at his fence in his bathrobe. I saw him through the small garage window, his silhouette outlined by his porch light. He was an older man who lived alone and kept odd hours. I had seen him outside late at night before. He stood there listening. The coughing got worse for a few minutes, then quieter, then started again. The banging continued on and off, irregular and desperate. Fergus stayed at the fence for almost 10 minutes. His face looked troubled in the darkness. Finally, he went back inside, but he kept looking over his shoulder toward our yard, like he knew something was wrong, like he did not know what to do about it. Early the next morning, before Dad woke up, I slipped out of the garage while it was still dark. My hands shook as I tore a page from my school notebook. I wrote 3 words. Please help us. Then I added our address. The note was vague and desperate, but I was running out of options. Fergus was the only neighbor close enough to hear what happened at night. I folded the paper twice, crept across our yard to the fence line, and pushed through the gap between the boards into Fergus's property. His mailbox was by the front door. I shoved the note inside and ran back before anyone saw me. I did not know if he would do anything. Maybe he would think I was dramatic. Maybe he would think I was a kid making up stories for attention. But I had to try. Dad had cut off every other path. Back in the garage, I lay down and pretended to sleep, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. If Dad found out I had contacted Fergus, the punishment would be worse than the garage. That afternoon, someone knocked on our front door. Dad answered with his usual charming smile. Fergus stood there holding a small package, making some excuse about it being delivered to his house by mistake. I hovered in the hallway behind Dad, trying to make eye contact without being obvious. Dad and Fergus chatted pleasantly about the weather, about how cold it had been at night, about normal neighbor things. Fergus asked subtle questions about the family. Dad deflected everyone with practiced ease. He said we were all busy with school and work. He said everything was fine. Then Fergus asked if everyone was feeling okay, because he had heard coughing the night before. Dad laughed. He said Yasmin had a little cold, but nothing serious. I tried to catch Fergus's eye. Dad shifted his body just enough to block me from view while still smiling and making small talk. Fergus looked frustrated and uncertain. He wanted to say more. I could tell. But he did not know how to do it without sounding rude or intrusive. After a few minutes, he left with the package. He glanced back at the house, worried. Dad closed the door. Then he turned and looked at me. His eyes were cold and calculating. He suspected something, even if he did not have proof yet. At school, Mrs. McCann sat at her desk after class, filing paperwork with a serious expression. I did not know it at the time, but she had been thinking about me all day, about my exhaustion, about the essay I wrote that made me sound trapped, about the way I looked terrified when she mentioned calling home. She opened a mandated reporter form on her computer and started typing. She listed everything she had observed over the past few weeks: falling asleep in class, flinching when touched, difficulty concentrating, references in my writing to sleeping in uncomfortable places, fear around going home, avoiding questions about my family, looking thinner and more tired every day. It was not perfect proof of anything. There was no single detail she could point to and say, this is definitely abuse, but it was enough to trigger an investigation. Enough to get someone official to look. She submitted the report and sent a copy to the school counselor. Then she sat back, relieved and worried at the same time. 2 days later, a CPS social worker named Amani Mendez scheduled an unannounced home visit for the following afternoon. She did not tell our family directly. She coordinated with Mrs. McCann to confirm the address and the best time to find everyone home. I did not know any of this was happening yet. I was sitting in class trying to stay awake, wondering if my note to Fergus had done anything. During lunch, Mrs. McCann sent me an email saying she was thinking of me and hoped things got better soon. It felt like a tiny lifeline in the middle of drowning. I read it 3 times on the school library computer, searching for hidden meaning or promises she could not openly make. The words were simple and kind, and that made my chest hurt because I was not used to adults caring without wanting something in return. Then I deleted the email in case Dad somehow checked the school system, but I memorized the words first. The next morning, Dad seemed different. Tense, alert, like he sensed something coming. Maybe he noticed I was acting different. Maybe he was paranoid after Fergus's visit and Mrs. McCann's phone call. Whatever it was, he spent the morning preparing. He moved through the house with cold efficiency. He put boards over the pit to make it look like a garden project. He threw seed packets on top for decoration. He went to the shed, tossed clean blankets over the dirty ones, and arranged everything to look normal and temporary, like a place for camping supplies instead of a punishment cell. Then he called us all into the kitchen and coached us on what to say if anyone asked questions. Tell them we were a normal family. Tell them the shed was for camping equipment. Tell them we sometimes slept outside for fun in good weather. Yusuf repeated the instructions eagerly, nodding and asking clarifying questions like he was studying for a test. Mom nodded mechanically, her face blank and obedient. I realized they were all going to lie perfectly. Not because they did not know the truth, because they were too scared to do anything else, too broken to believe that telling the truth could help instead of making the punishment worse. When Amani arrived that afternoon with her clipboard and kind smile, we performed exactly as Dad had scripted. She was a Black woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a gentle voice. She sat in our living room asking questions while Dad hovered nearby. Yusuf enthusiastically described our loving family. He volunteered stories about camping trips that had never happened. He talked about family game nights and weekend activities, painting a picture of normal suburban life so smoothly it almost sounded real. Mom spoke in a quiet, controlled voice about normal family stress and teenage drama. She said, I had been going through a difficult phase lately. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Amani and drag her to the backyard. I wanted to show her the pit, the shed, the dirty blankets, the rust, the dirt walls, the tarp. I wanted to make her understand what really happened after dark. But Dad's hand was on my shoulder. Heavy. Threatening. The words died in my throat before they could form. I nodded along with whatever Mom said. My voice stayed small and careful. Amani noticed things anyway. Her trained eyes caught details we could not hide completely. She noticed how all of us looked to Dad before answering. She saw the way Mom's hands shook slightly when she talked, how she kept smoothing her shirt over and over. She saw the dark circles under my eyes. She saw Yasmin's pale, sickly face and the way she could barely sit upright on the couch. Amani asked to speak with Yasmin privately. She also requested permission to schedule a medical evaluation, citing concerns about Yasmin's visible weight loss and chronic cough. Dad agreed smoothly. He played the concerned father perfectly. He said he just wanted the best for his daughter. He talked about how worried he had been and how he had been meaning to take Yasmin to the doctor, but work had been busy. But I could feel the rage building underneath the performance. His hand tightened on my shoulder just slightly, a warning only I could feel. After Amani left, Dad moved through the house like a storm. He confiscated every phone and device he could find. He searched our rooms with cold efficiency, opening drawers, checking closets, looking under mattresses, feeling through hiding spots like someone who had done this many times before. He took my diary from under my mattress, Yusuf's laptop from his desk, Mom's old tablet that barely worked. He piled everything on the kitchen table while we watched in silence. Then he announced that outside contact was forbidden except for school. Anyone caught talking to teachers, neighbors, or social workers about family business would spend a week straight in the pit. His voice was calm. His eyes were furious. We all knew he meant it. I thought about my hidden phone in the garage insulation and prayed he would not find it. My one remaining link to the outside world had to stay secret. That night, after everyone went to their assigned sleeping places, I waited until I heard Dad's bedroom door close. Then I sneaked into the garage. My hands shook as I pulled out the small, worn notebook I had hidden under my sleeping bag earlier. It was filled with months of data, every ranking, every vote, every alliance, every punishment, every pattern in Dad's system. I felt along the garage wall until I found a gap in the insulation between the studs. The pink fiberglass scratched my fingers as I pushed the notebook deep inside, stuffing it as far back as my arm could reach. It was not much, but it was proof that this had been happening for years, proof that Dad manipulated everything while pretending the system was fair. I pulled my hand out and arranged the insulation to look untouched. The wall looked normal. For the first time all day, I let myself breathe. I went back to the yoga mat and lay down, listening to the house settle into its usual nighttime sounds. That was when I heard Mom's voice through the thin walls. She was in Yasmin's room, whispering. I could barely make out the words, but I heard enough. She was talking about maybe taking Yasmin to the clinic the next day without telling Dad. Her voice shook, but for the first time in months, it sounded determined. For 1 second, I let myself hope. Maybe Mom was going to do something. Maybe she was finally going to stand up and protect Yasmin instead of accepting whatever Dad decided. Then Yasmin coughed. That wet, painful cough that had been getting worse for weeks. She was too weak to answer. I heard Mom's brief spark of courage die in the silence. Then I heard her crying quietly into her pillow. I closed my eyes and forced myself not to cry too. Crying did not change anything. I needed to stay focused on what I could do. The next morning, I was eating cereal at the kitchen table when Dad announced he would drive Mom and Yasmin to the clinic himself. His voice was cheerful and concerned. The caring father role. Mom's face went blank. She realized immediately that he had heard her whispering. He had taken over her plan before she could act on it. Dad said he had been worried about Yasmin too. He said he wanted to make sure she got proper care. He stole Mom's idea and made it his own. At the clinic, Dad stayed with them the entire time. He sat right beside Yasmin during the exam. He answered the doctor's questions before Mom could speak. He described Yasmin's symptoms in careful detail that made him sound attentive and responsible. The doctor prescribed basic cold medicine and told them to come back if the cough did not improve in a week. Dad thanked him warmly and guided Mom and Yasmin straight back to the car, never giving Mom a moment alone to say anything different. When they got home, Mom's face was blank again. That empty, defeated look. She had learned the lesson Dad wanted her to learn. Even her smallest attempt at independence belonged to him if he wanted it. At dinner that night, I took a huge risk. I slipped my phone into my hoodie pocket before coming to the table. Dad's search had missed it because I had hidden it in the bathroom ceiling tiles, and now it was the only link to the outside world I had left. I positioned it carefully with the microphone facing out. Then I pressed record as Dad started reading from his clipboard. The audio captured everything. Muffled, but clear. Dad's voice announcing that it was time for rankings. The scrape of chairs as we shifted nervously. His explanation of how the system worked and why it was fair. Mom's quiet voice ranking herself last like always. Yusef's manipulation as he reminded people about favors they owed him. The phone picked up all of it. Proof that this was real. Proof we were not making it up. My hands sweated under the table, but I kept them still. I was terrified. Dad would notice the bulge in my pocket or hear some tiny electronic sound. After he finished counting, Dad stood with barely contained excitement. His eyes lit up as he declared that the pit was now live for that night's placement. He described it like he was unveiling a new feature. Storms were coming that week, he said, but the tarp would keep the rain out, and the dirt walls would provide natural insulation. He talked about drainage and temperature regulation like he was proud of his engineering. His enthusiasm for our suffering was so obvious that my stomach twisted. I looked down at my plate so my disgust would not show. Dad asked if anyone had questions about the new system. No one spoke. We all knew questions made things worse. Then Yusef sat up straighter and pointed at Mom. He accused her of tampering with the voting by trying to signal to Yasmin during the ranking. It was completely made up, but it gave him a perfect excuse. Dad's eyes narrowed. He asked Mom if it was true. Mom shook her head, but her denial was weak. She was too exhausted and defeated to fight with them. Dad seized on the accusation immediately. He praised Yusef for maintaining system integrity and being vigilant about rule violations. Then he confirmed that Mom would take the pit that night as punishment for attempting to manipulate the voting process. I watched my brother sacrifice our mother without hesitation. He sold her out to protect his own ranking. Something inside me broke permanently. The small part of me that still believed family meant something died right there at the dinner table. Yusef would not meet my eyes as Dad wrote Mom's name next to the pit assignment. I realized my brother was completely lost to Dad's system. After dinner, I went to the garage and lay down on the yoga mat while rain started falling outside. Each drop hit the roof like a tiny hammer. Mom was in that pit with only a tarp between her and the storm. Guilt and rage mixed together in my chest until I could barely breathe. I kept thinking that maybe I could have ranked her higher. Maybe I could have stopped it. Maybe I had failed her. But the anger made my resolve clearer. Tomorrow, I was calling 911 if I had to. No matter what happened afterward. No matter how Dad punished me, someone had to break the silence. Even if he punished me until I broke too. Staying quiet was not protecting anyone anymore. I lay awake for hours listening to the rain get heavier, imagining Mom in that dirt hole getting colder and wetter. I promised myself it would end. At school the next morning, Mrs. McCann pulled me aside before class. She asked directly about the uncomfortable sleeping places I had mentioned in my essay. Her voice was gentle, but firm. I was so exhausted and scared that the words came out before I could stop them. I told her about the shed. I told her it was metal and cold and full of spiders. I told her we took turns sleeping there based on rankings. Mrs. McCann went very still. Her face got paler with every detail. She asked careful questions. How often did it happen? Who decided the sleeping arrangements? Where was the shed? Did Yasmin sleep there too? I could see her mentally filing another report even while we spoke. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote notes. When I finished, she told me she was going to make sure I got help. By lunch, Mrs. McCann had updated her CPS report with explicit concerns about inadequate shelter and the risk of hypothermia. She included my direct statement about the metal shed, her observations of Yasmin's declining health during school pickup, and the fear-based dynamics she had seen in our family. The report was flagged as high priority because it involved children and dangerous living conditions. CPS assigned it to Amani for immediate follow-up. That afternoon, Amani returned to our house with 2 police officers. Their expressions were serious and concerned. Dad's performance was flawless. He invited them inside with a warm smile. He showed them the shed, now filled with camping equipment and clean blankets, making it look like a fun outdoor adventure spot instead of a punishment cell. He calmly explained that I had been telling stories because I was angry about normal discipline. He said I had a vivid imagination and sometimes exaggerated to get attention. He suggested I might need counseling for my tendency to dramatize regular family situations. The officers looked uncertain. They compared Dad's calm explanations to what they had been told to investigate, and I could see him winning them over. One officer asked me directly if anyone forced me to sleep outside. Dad's hand landed on my shoulder. Heavy. Threatening. His fingers pressed into my shoulder blade. A silent reminder of what happened if I spoke. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. The officers exchanged glances. They told Dad they would file a report, but everything seemed fine for now. They told him to maintain proper supervision and communicate better with the school. Then they left. As I watched their car pull away, my heart sank into my stomach. Dad closed the door. The pleasant expression dropped from his face like a mask being removed. He did not yell. He did not scream. Somehow, that made it worse. He just looked at me with calm, cold eyes and announced that I would sleep in the pit that night, regardless of rankings, as a consequence for lying to authorities. Mom's head snapped up. For a second, I thought she might protest. Then Dad turned that same cold look on her. She shrank back into her chair without a sound. I watched it happen, and something clicked in my brain. This was what seeking help cost. The punishment came immediately. Everyone else watched because they were too scared to become next. Dad did not need to hit us or break things when he could control the entire house with a look and the threat of a hole in the ground. The rest of dinner passed in silence. Dad finished his meal like nothing had happened. I sat there knowing that in a few hours, I would climb into actual dirt with only a tarp between me and the sky. When dinner ended, Dad dismissed everyone except me. He explained very calmly that this was what happened when family business was shared with outsiders. He said I had brought it on myself by exaggerating normal discipline to teachers who did not understand how families worked. His voice never rose above normal conversation level. Every word landed like a physical blow. That night, I climbed down into the pit. The reality of it hit me harder than I expected. The dirt was cold and damp under my hands. Moisture seeped through my clothes immediately, making everything feel heavy and wet. The tarp above me dripped rain through small tears. Cold drops hit my face and neck in random patterns I could not predict or avoid. The walls were close enough that I could touch both sides if I stretched out my arms. That made my chest tighten. I tried to find a position that did not hurt, but every way I sat or lay down pressed more cold mud against my skin. Above me, I could hear normal house sounds. Footsteps. Doors closing. Pipes humming. Dad getting ready for bed in his warm room with his soft mattress and locked door. Through the fence, I heard Yasmin coughing in the shed. That wet, painful sound meant her lungs had still not recovered from pneumonia. She was only 10 feet away, but it might as well have been miles. We were both trapped in our separate punishments, suffering alone while Dad slept, knowing his system was working exactly the way he designed it. I spent hours shivering in the mud while rain hammered the tarp. I forced myself to stay calm, even though the walls felt like they were closing in. Spiders crawled across my arms. I could not see them in the darkness, but I felt every leg. Something with too many legs ran over my ankle, and I jerked away so hard I hit my elbow against the dirt wall. The cold seeped into my bones. I could not stop shaking, but I made myself focus on tomorrow, what I would do next, how I would make someone believe me. I thought about Mrs. McCann's concerned face. I thought about the police looking uncertain. I thought about Dad's perfect performance and how easily it had hidden the truth. My body was freezing and scared, but my mind got harder with every hour in that hole. I would not let Dad win. I would not let him bury me, Yasmin, and Mom inside his sick system. I would make someone see. That same night, Fergus heard the sounds again. The rain had stopped, so the backyard was quiet, except for suffering. He stood at his window in his dark house and listened to Yasmin's coughing from the shed and softer sounds from somewhere else in the yard. He could not see anything clearly because of the fence and darkness, but he pulled out his phone and started recording. He captured Yasmin's coughing. Harsh, wet, concerning. Underneath it were other noises that might have been crying or someone trying to stay quiet while in pain. Fergus did not know exactly what to do with the recording, but something told him to keep it. He recorded for 5 full minutes before the sounds quieted down. Then he saved the file with the date and timestamp showing it had been recorded at 2 in the morning. The next morning at school, before PE class, I went to the bathroom and took a permanent marker from my backpack. My hands shook as I wrote on my left forearm in big, clear letters. "We sleep in a pit." I did not write anything else. No explanations. No details. Just those 5 words. In the locker room, other students noticed immediately. They whispered. They pointed. They asked what it meant. I did not elaborate. I did not dramatize. I just repeated the same answer whenever someone asked. Sometimes we sleep in a pit in the backyard. That was it. That was the truth. The PE teacher saw it while checking that everyone was dressed for class. Her face went pale. She told me to come with her right now. She walked me straight to the counselor's office without explaining anything to the other students. I let her lead me there, feeling both terrified and relieved. At least someone was taking it seriously this time. The school counselor sat me down in her small office and asked careful questions. What did I mean by pit? How often did this happen? Where was it? How big was it? I stayed calm and factual. I described the dimensions, about 4 feet deep, maybe 3 feet wide, with dirt walls and a tarp stretched over the top. I explained the mud, the rain dripping through, the walls close enough to touch both sides at once. I avoided dramatic language. I did not say it felt like a grave. I did not say I thought Dad wanted to bury us. I just described the physical reality of what existed in my backyard. The counselor's face got paler with each detail. She wrote everything down. Then Mrs. McCann came in and interviewed me separately. She asked her own questions about the pit, the shed, and how the ranking system worked. I described it the same way. Factual, specific, very fiable. I gave measurements, I gave details, I explained the order of placements, I explained Dad's clipboard, I explained how he exempted himself. Both of their faces showed the exact moment they realized I was telling the literal truth. Not speaking in metaphors, not acting out, not exaggerating. This was real. This was actually happening. Their expressions shifted from concern to horror. For the first time, I knew they believed me. Mrs. McCann excused herself and went straight to her office to call Amani. Her voice was urgent, even though she was trying to sound professional. She named the pit explicitly. She explained that I had now made consistent disclosures across multiple days in different contexts. She emphasized that this was not teenage drama or attention-seeking behavior. I was describing specific, verifiable conditions that posed immediate danger to multiple children. She mentioned the writing on my arm, the interview details, the fact that I stayed calm and factual instead of emotional or exaggerated. Amani's voice went tight with controlled anger. She understood that the previous wellness check had missed the real situation. Dad's performance had fooled them while actual abuse continued in the backyard. Mrs. McCann could hear the shift in Amani's tone. Professional concern had become personal outrage, the sound of someone who knew she had failed to protect children, and was now determined to fix it. Amani immediately started coordinating with medical services to get authorization for a full evaluation of Yasmin. She was seriously concerned that the chronic cough and visible decline meant real neglect that needed medical documentation. She called Dr. Romano at the Children's Hospital, explained the situation, and arranged for Yasmin to be brought in for a complete assessment as soon as possible. Amani knew medical evidence would be harder for Dad to deflect. Doctors documenting physical harm created a case courts took seriously. She started building a file with every report and every piece of evidence, preparing for emergency removal if the medical evaluation confirmed what she suspected. When Dad got called by the school about the writing on my arm and the counselor interview, he came home in a cold rage that made the air feel dangerous. He walked through the door and announced we were all being pulled from school immediately. He said he would not allow interference in family matters from people who did not understand proper discipline. He said anyone who tried to visit would be denied access. He said he was within his rights to control who spoke to his children and when. Control was slipping out of his hands, so he tightened his grip. Mom sat frozen at the kitchen table while Dad paced and talked about his rights, privacy, and teachers overstepping their authority. Yusef nodded along with everything Dad said. I could see him already calculating how to use the situation in that night's rankings. I watched Dad and realized I was running out of time. If he pulled us from school, he could isolate us completely. So after the final bell, I told Mrs. McCann I needed to stay late to work on a project. Instead, I went to the public library 3 blocks away. I used one of their computers to create another fake email account, one with a name that did not connect to me. Then I set up cloud storage with that email. My hands shook as I uploaded everything from my phone. The photos of Yasmin's frostbitten toes, the rust marks on her skin, the shed from outside, the audio recordings of dinner rankings, Dad's voice explaining the system. Then I wrote an email to Mrs. McCann's school address explaining what each file showed. I labeled the files clearly so she would understand the context. It was my last play. Putting the evidence somewhere Dad could not confiscate or destroy, even if he took my phone that night. I felt terrified and strangely calm when I hit send. I had done something I could not take back, but it was the only option left. The confirmation appeared on the screen. I logged out of everything, cleared the browser history, and walked out into the afternoon sun feeling like I had set something huge in motion. Something I could no longer control. I walked home from the library with my phone feeling heavy in my pocket, even though I had deleted everything from it after sending the email. The sun was setting. Dinner rankings were coming soon. But for once, I was not focused on where I would sleep. Bigger things were moving now. When I got home, Dad was in his office and did not notice me slip through the back door. I went straight to my room and waited. That evening, after a silent dinner where nobody looked at anyone else, I was lying on the yoga mat in the garage when Yusef appeared in the doorway. His face was red. His hands were shaking. He walked toward me like he had been holding something in all day. He knew I had been talking to teachers. He was scared because my snitching put him at risk too. He started listing everything I had done like he was reading charges in court. The counselor meetings, the writing on my arm, the teachers, the way I was destroying the family. His voice got louder as he threatened to tell Dad every detail. He promised I would spend weeks in the pit once Dad found out. Then he mentioned the pit, and something broke in his voice. For 1 second, his eyes showed pure fear instead of calculation. He was terrified too. He had just survived by siding with Dad instead of fighting him. Before I could say anything, Yusef turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the garage with the smell of gasoline and motor oil. Hours passed. I could not sleep. My mind kept spinning through what might happen the next day. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a crash from inside the house. Then Yasmin's scared voice called for help. I ran inside and found Mom on the kitchen floor. Her body was crumpled, like someone had cut her strings. She was breathing, but her eyes were closed. She did not respond when I shook her shoulder. Yasmin stood in the doorway in her pajamas, coughing and crying at the same time. Dad appeared from upstairs, still half asleep, and started saying something about Mom being dramatic. I did not wait to hear the rest. I ran out the back door in my bare feet, across the cold grass, straight to Fergus's house. I banged on his door so hard my knuckles hurt. I did not care that it was the middle of the night. I did not care that I was in pajamas. I was crying and begging when he opened the door. I told him to call 911. Mom needed help, and I did not trust Dad to do it. Fergus took one look at my face and did not ask questions. He grabbed his phone and made the call while I stood shivering on his porch. The ambulance arrived in less than 10 minutes. Red and blue lights flashed across the neighborhood. 2 EMS workers rushed inside with their equipment, while Fergus stayed with me on the porch, one hand on my shoulder. Through the window, I saw them working on Mom, while Dad stood nearby, talking and gesturing. One of the EMS workers kept looking around the house. She noticed things. Our scared faces. Yasmin's pale skin. The way Yasmin could not stop coughing. The strange setup visible through the back window, where the shed and tarp-covered pit sat in the yard. She wrote things on her clipboard between checking Mom's blood pressure and heart rate. Dad tried his charming routine. He explained that Mom had been stressed and had probably fainted from standing too fast. The EMS worker's expression did not change. She documented his defensive responses. She documented the fear in our faces. When she helped Mom onto the stretcher, she made direct eye contact with me. I saw recognition there. She knew something was very wrong in that house. Less than an hour after the EMS workers left, a car pulled up. Amani got out with 2 police officers. She carried folders and official-looking papers, and her face was harder than I had ever seen it. One officer stayed by the door while Amani walked straight to Dad and handed him documents. In a calm, professional voice, she explained that she had an emergency removal order for Yasmin based on immediate danger. The order cited medical concerns from Dr. Romano's notes, the documented inadequate shelter reported by multiple sources, and all the evidence built from my disclosures, Mrs. McCann's observations, and the EMS documentation from that night. My case is under review too, Amani said, but Yasmin was being removed right now. Dad's face changed from confused to angry to scared in about 3 seconds. His control was finally cracking. His perfect system was being taken apart by people he could not manipulate as easily. He started talking fast. Parental rights, false accusations, government overreach, his lawyer, lawsuits. His voice got louder, but the police officers stood with their arms crossed, unmoved. Amani's expression stayed hard as stone. She explained exactly what the law allowed in cases of immediate danger to children. She said the evidence was too consistent across too many sources to dismiss. Dad could comply, or the officers would arrest him for obstruction, and Yasmin would still be removed. His choice. Watching Dad forced into helplessness made my stomach twist with fear and satisfaction. For the first time in years, he had no power over what happened next. They took Yasmin first. They wrapped her in a blanket from the ambulance because she was shivering. Even though the night was not that cold, she looked back at me with scared eyes as they helped her into Amani's car. Then Amani told me to pack a bag because I was going to a safe intake facility while they finished the assessment. Mom sat on the couch looking lost and confused while Amani gave her a card for a domestic violence advocate. The drive away from the house felt like I was watching someone else's life happen. I kept looking out the window, expecting Dad to chase us down and drag us back, even though I knew he could not with police there. The city lights blurred past. Yasmin coughed in the front seat. Amani drove carefully through the empty streets. At the hospital, Dr. Romano examined Yasmin under bright lights that made her skin look even paler. He photographed her frostbitten toes, where the tissue was damaged and discolored. He documented signs of chronic malnutrition in her weight and the way her ribs showed through her thin pajama top. He listened to her lungs and noted respiratory issues from repeated cold exposure in the shed and pit. He found bruises in different stages of healing on her arms and legs. Every finding went into his report in medical language that made everything official and real. This was not normal discipline. This was not tough parenting. It was systematic neglect and abuse, supported by objective medical evidence. Every line he wrote strengthened the case for keeping us away from Dad permanently. A judge reviewed everything that same night because it was an emergency. She read Dr. Romano's medical report, the EMS documentation, my disclosures, and Mrs. McCann's observations. She issued a temporary protective order for Yasmin immediately. My case was still pending further investigation because I was older and the immediate medical danger was not as obvious. Youssef stayed with Dad for the moment because he was 16 and had not made any disclosures about wanting help. That felt wrong, but I was too exhausted to argue. The order said Dad could not contact me or Yasmin except through supervised channels approved by the court. Just knowing there was a legal barrier between us helped me breathe a little easier, even though everything still felt uncertain and terrifying. The emergency shelter processed our intake with forms about medical history, education, family dynamics, and trauma symptoms. A woman with kind eyes asked questions and wrote down my answers without judging me or looking shocked. Yasmin and I had to go to different rooms because of space limitations, and that made my chest tight with worry. A staff member promised I could see her first thing in the morning. Everything felt temporary, uncertain, like we were waiting for the next bad thing to happen. But at least we were not in the pit that night. At least we were not in the shed listening to rain hammer the metal roof. At least we were somewhere warm, with real beds, and people who were supposed to keep us safe. The next morning, Amani came back and explained the safety plan in detail. Dad could not reach us without going through official channels. Any contact had to be supervised and approved by the court. If he tried to contact us directly, he would be arrested for violating the protective order. She offered Mom the same protections if she wanted them. Mom sat across from us looking small and scared, caught between her fear of Dad and her fear of losing her home and everything familiar. I could see her struggling. She wanted to leave, but she did not know how to exist without Dad's structure telling her what to do every day. Even though that structure was destroying all of us, it was all she knew. Amani gave her time to think and promised to check again the next day. For now, Yasmin and I were safe. For now, that had to be enough. The next morning, a woman from the shelter knocked on my door and explained they had a therapist who worked with kids in situations like mine. I agreed to meet her, even though the idea of talking to a stranger about the rankings and the pit made my stomach hurt. The therapist was younger than I expected. She had kind eyes and did not push. She sat across from me in a small office and explained that weekly sessions were available whenever I was ready. There was no pressure, no timeline. This was my space to use however I needed. It felt strange to have someone care about how I was doing without expecting anything back. No ranking, no punishment, no clipboard. She gave me a card with her contact information and told me the shelter staff could schedule appointments anytime. Then she let me leave after 10 minutes because she could tell I was not ready yet. That afternoon, Mrs. McCann came to the shelter. She carried a stack of my schoolwork and 3 books she thought I might like. Her eyes were wet when she saw me sitting in the common area. She did not ask for details. She did not make me relive anything. She just pulled up a chair and told me she was proud of me for speaking up. She explained that I could return to school whenever I felt ready. She would help me catch up on assignments. My teachers knew I was dealing with family stuff, and they were being understanding. Having one adult who believed me and fought for me made the nightmare feel slightly less lonely. Like maybe I had not been crazy for thinking the rankings were wrong. She stayed for an hour. We organized schoolwork and talked about normal things, upcoming assignments, a book she thought I would love, what I might need when I came back. She treated me like a regular student instead of a victim. That mattered more than I knew how to say. 2 days later, my phone rang from a blocked number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. Dad's voice came through smooth and calm. That reasonable tone. The tone he used when he was trying to manipulate someone. He told me the whole situation was a misunderstanding. He said if I explained to the judge how the system really worked, they would understand it was fair. He said I was being dramatic. He said I was ruining the family over normal discipline. My hands started shaking. His words tried to crawl into my brain and make me doubt what I knew was true. Instead of listening, instead of arguing, I hung up. Then I immediately went to find Amani. My voice shook as I reported the violation, but I did it anyway. I told her about the blocked number, what he said, and how he was not supposed to contact me. Amani's face hardened. She made notes on her tablet, thanked me for reporting it right away, and promised it would be documented. For the first time, I felt like I had some power. Not much, but some. My voice mattered. People listened. The emergency court hearing happened 3 days later in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and cleaning products. Dad's lawyer stood and argued that it was government overreach. He said normal parenting was being treated like a crime. He said the protective order was too strict for what amounted to family discipline. The judge listened with a neutral expression. Then she asked to see Dr. Romano's medical report and the documentation of Dad's phone call violation. She read slowly. Her face got more serious with every paragraph. Then she announced that she was extending the protective order for another 90 days while the investigation continued. Dad's lawyer objected. But the evidence was too clear to dismiss. Too many reports. Too many medical findings. Too many documented violations. Too many sources saying the same thing. The judge made it clear that Yasmin and I were legally protected from Dad's control for now. Any further contact violations would result in immediate arrest. Mom finally agreed to meet with the domestic violence advocate at the shelter. She sat in a private office with her hands twisted together in her lap. The advocate was patient and gentle. She walked Mom through separation paperwork and explained options for housing assistance and legal support. Mom's hands shook as she signed the forms. Her signature was wobbly and uncertain. Every page changed her life. She was scared about money, scared about where she would live, scared about how she would survive without Dad telling her what to do every day, even though his control had been destroying all of us. The advocate listed resources, support groups, and programs that could help. I could see Mom struggling to believe any of it was real. It was hard watching her realize how trapped she had been, how the rankings had killed her ability to imagine any path forward without Dad's system. That same day, I got a text from Yusuf. It started hostile and angry. He called me a snitch. He blamed me for destroying the family. He listed all the ways I had ruined everything. He said I should have followed the rules. He said now he was stuck alone with Dad, and it was all my fault. Then the tone changed. His next message admitted he was scared. He was living in the house with just Dad now, that the system was falling apart. He asked if I thought he could join us in foster care, if there was a way out for him too. The words were uncertain, almost vulnerable. I stared at the messages for a long time. Part of me was still angry at him for everything. For the sabotage, for digging the pit deeper, for selling Mom out at dinner, for choosing Dad's approval over the rest of us again and again. But I also knew he was a victim too. He had survived by helping Dad instead of fighting him. I texted back that I did not know what was possible, but he should talk to Amani. I sent him her contact information. I was not sure I had forgiven him, but I could still give him a door. The next morning, Amani called me into her office and explained she had been working with Fergus to arrange something called fictive kin placement. That meant I might be able to stay with him instead of going to a regular foster home while the case was investigated. She explained that fictive kin was for someone who was not related by blood but had an existing relationship with the family. Fergus had agreed to be considered after everything he witnessed. He told Amani he had been worried about us for months and wished he had acted sooner. He had a spare bedroom and wanted to help if the placement was approved. There still needed to be background checks, home inspections, and official approval. But having a familiar option instead of strangers felt like an unexpected gift. 2 weeks later, after all the checks cleared, Fergus picked me up from the shelter with my few belongings in a plastic bag. He drove me to his house, right next door to the house I used to live in. I did not look at Dad's place as we pulled into the driveway. Inside, Fergus showed me a small bedroom he had set up with simple furniture and clean sheets. He explained his house rules quietly. Be respectful of the space. Help with basic chores, like dishes and trash. Keep up with schoolwork. Talk to him if I needed anything. He was not trying to be a replacement parent. He was not pretending everything was fine. He was just offering steady support while things got sorted out. That night, I lay in an actual bed with soft blankets and a door that locked from the inside. I cried for an hour from the pure relief of feeling safe. The mattress was comfortable. The room was warm. Nobody was going to announce rankings. Nobody was going to send me to the shed. Nobody was going to put me in the pit. My body did not know how to process that kind of safety after years of the system. Dr. Romano scheduled a meeting with me and Amani to explain Yasmin's care plan. He said she needed continued treatment for the breathing problems from pneumonia. She needed physical therapy for the frostbite damage to her toes. She needed regular checkups to make sure she was gaining weight properly. Healing would be slow. Some effects might be permanent. That was scary to hear. But at least she was getting real medical attention now, instead of being left to suffer in a metal shed. He gave us a schedule of appointments, prescriptions, and therapy sessions. For the first time, Yasmin's recovery felt organized and possible, instead of hopeless. When I returned to school 2 weeks later, everything felt familiar and completely different at the same time. Mrs. McCann welcomed me back with a warm smile. She gave me time to catch up on missed work without pressure. For her next essay assignment about personal growth, I wrote about the power of silence. I did not describe the pit or the rankings directly. Instead, I wrote about how silence protects people who hurt others. I wrote about how speaking up, even when you are terrified of what might happen, is the only way to break cycles of abuse and control. My voice felt stronger on the page than it had ever felt at Dad's dinner table. Every word was careful. Every sentence felt like taking back something he had stolen from me. Writing the truth without fear of punishment felt like proof that his system had not completely destroyed my ability to think, feel, and resist. A week later, Amani called to tell me they had scheduled a case plan meeting for the next month. They would interview Dad separately and figure out what happened next. Reunification, longer separation, maybe keeping us apart permanently. The not knowing was hard. Nothing was fully solved. Yusef was still living with Dad. Mom had not decided if she was leaving for good. The legal process moved slowly, and sometimes it felt like nothing was changing. I wanted everything fixed immediately. I wanted guarantees. I wanted someone to promise that we would be safe forever. Amani reminded me that progress did not always happen in a straight line. She said safety came in stages, not all at once. She said I had already done the hardest part by speaking up. Her words helped a little, but I still felt stuck in an in-between place. I was safe, but my family was not completely free yet. Tonight, I am lying in a real bed at Fergus's house, warm under an actual blanket, and the strangeness of it almost hurts. I keep waiting for Dad to announce rankings. I keep waiting for Yusef to sabotage me. I keep waiting for the punishment that always came before, but it does not come. The house is quiet, except for Fergus watching TV downstairs, and I realize this is what normal feels like. Boring, peaceful, without constant fear. My body still does not know how to relax, because for years it was always ready for the next bad thing, always calculating who to sacrifice, always preparing for cold metal, concrete, or dirt walls. Now there are soft pillows, warm blankets, a door that closes, and nobody is going to hurt me tonight. I do not know what happens next with the investigation, the court case, or whether Mom will finally leave Dad for good. But I know I will keep telling the truth for as long as it takes, because silence is what allowed the pit to exist in the first place, and I am done being quiet.